the director of the Institute of Bioethics, currently holds the chair of Bioethics, and is professor of philosophy at Franciscan University in Steubenville. Dr. Lee's address today is entitled Human Dignity and Public Culture. So would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Lee?
Good afternoon. I hope everything is going well this morning. I enjoyed the talks. And you'll be glad to know that a lot of the things that I was going to say were already said in different form. So we're going to have a review session for some of them. Great minds think alike. Something like that. Okay. But there will be some new things also. Can everyone hear me like this, when I'm like this, when I'm speaking like this? No, okay, let's...
I'm back over here.
Can we turn him up?
Maybe turn up the volume or something.
Bring up the volume. How is the volume brought up? Okay.
Maybe I control it.
Volume knob is behind you, I believe, so volume control.
The volume knob
On the
is...
wall behind you.
On the wall behind
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, there you
The one that says volume control?
Yes, there you go.
Is that, okay, oh.
go. We're good.
Wow,
We
okay.
found it.
Is that too high?
No, that's fine.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. In the last... Was that...
Don't turn it down.
Okay.
It's fine.
A little uncomfortable with my own voice, okay. But, okay, in the last 7 to 10 years, there's been a culture change. I think the culture and the cultural attitude toward abortion has shifted in some ways very bad in the last 7 or 8 years. I think the culture is, I think before, if you go back 20, 30 years ago, I think the goal of the pro-abortion movement was to get liberty, was freedom, was tolerance for the Abortion Act. And of course that's inherently unjust. It is unjust to unborn children to deny them the protection of the law. And so the fight was whether to allow women this, allow really boyfriends and husbands and so forth also, the liberty of killing their own children. Now it's shifted somewhat. Now there's the secularist movement has become more virulent, has become more confident. And now abortion is being presented not just as something, well, it's something bad, but people have to be able to, they have to have the freedom or the liberty to do it. But now it's being presented as something that is good. As something that is good, as something maybe is something that good that women need in order to level the playing field between men and women in the workforce. And anyone who disagrees with that is then seen as a bigot, as hateful, as participating in the war on women. So there's been a shift now, I think. So I want to address that, and I'm going to address that a little bit more specifically in the second part. In the first part, I want to say, in my talk, I want to say how we should address, how we should articulate the basic pro-life argument. And there will be a few parts to that, and some of these are going to be review, as I said, from things that you've heard in other cases. But I think over the years, we've been able to refine the argument and to simplify the argument and to make it clearer. And the basic essential message, I think, is the same, that we need to emphasize, as Denise McCure was saying, we need to emphasize this question, this issue about what is it that makes certain beings valuable and worthy of protection, worthy of taking into account. What is it that makes some people valuable as subjects of rights? That's the main issue, I think, that hasn't changed, and I think we can address that more clearly than we could, say, 20, 30 years ago. And then the second part of my talk will be a little shorter than the first part, will be to address this kind of equal protection argument as put forward as mainly as a moral argument. So the central issue in abortion still is the question of what is it, what kind of being is killed in abortion. Everyone knows that something is killed in abortion. The question is, what kind of being is killed in abortion? That remains the central question. It's not the only issue, but that still remains the central question. And that subdivides, as Denise, as both Denise and Dr. Kunat indicated, that subdivides into two issues. Is this a human being? Is this a human organism? Is it biologically the same kind of thing as you and me? That's one part of it. And secondly, given that it is a human organism, given that it is a human being, is this a human person? Is this a subject of rights? Is this something that we need to value for his or her own sake? Because many people will say nowadays that, yes, it is a human organism, yes, it's a human being, but it's not yet something that has rights. It's not yet a person. And so there are two parts. One, is this a human being? Secondly, is it a human person? Now I'm going to reverse the order somewhat, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that second part, that given that it is a human being, these for the sake of argument, and then I'll come back to that, but given that it is a human being, the first part is given that it is a human being, is this being a person? Is this being a subject of rights? Now, some philosophers, some people who argue this issue on the other side, some philosophers who are pro-abortion, or would say pro-choice, will admit that yes, what is in the womb, the human embryo, the human fetus, is a human organism, is a human being, but they will say it's not yet a person. And usually what they mean by that is that yes, you and I once were human organisms, you and I once were human embryos, human fetuses, but we were not valuable as subjects of rights when we were embryos or fetuses. In other words, what they're saying is that, yes, that's a human organism, but the human organism comes to be at one point, and then it becomes valuable as a subject of rights at some later point. So they will admit, very often, they will admit or agree with us on the biological issue, yes, it is a human organism, but deny or disagree on the ethical issue. Yes, it's a human organism. At some point, when I was in my mother's womb, when I was an embryo, and then when I was a fetus, I was not yet a person, they would say. And it's only persons that it's wrong to kill. It's only persons that deserve protection of the law. And this is, I think, saying, well, yes, I know the facts of life. I know it's a life, but sometimes, when they're that little, when they don't look like, they don't look like us. They're that little. Sometimes when they begin to be, they're as small as as a period at the end of a sentence in a book. They don't have self-consciousness. They don't have self-conscious desires. They don't have the attributes. Their argument is that they do not have the attributes. They do not have the characteristics that make something valuable as a subject of rights. So this is their argument. Now this brings up a very important issue. Of course, this is an argument put forward by philosophers, but it's not just philosophers. This gets filtered down into the culture textbooks, in high school textbooks even, people will say, well, in order to be valuable, you have to have certain attributes such as self-consciousness or a self-conscious desire. And so what they're saying, in effect, is that you and I are not valuable in virtue of what we are. We're not valuable in virtue of the fundamental kind of thing that we are. Rather, in order to be valuable, in order to be a subject of rights, we have to have, in addition to what we are, we have to have some other attribute. And whatever that attribute is, embryos and fetuses lack that attribute, and that's why it's okay to kill human embryos and fetuses. That's the argument. So that the issue here, I think, and we should, I'm going a little slow with what this issue is, because I think this issue comes up in different contexts. It comes up in a moral context. It comes up in the legal context. It comes up on different levels. It can be expressed in different ways. The question is, the issue is, what is it that makes some human beings, at least, valuable as subjects of rights? Because if you're talking with somebody, if we're having a conversation with somebody, if you're arguing with someone, or arguing with a lawyer even, they're going to admit that you and I, the ones who are in that argument, have rights. You and I are subjects of rights. We're valuable. But what is it that makes us valuable? What's the basis? What is it that makes us valuable? So, and there are two different types of questions, two different types of answers to that. Some people say, and what I would say, is that we are valuable in virtue of the fundamental kind of thing that we are. The fundamental kind of being that we are. We're valuable in virtue of what we are. We're not valuable just in virtue of certain attributes that we have in addition to what we are. We're not valuable just in virtue of certain certain characteristics that we have in addition to what we are, but we're valuable in virtue of what we are. So that's one side of the issue. Other people, the pro-life, the pro-abortion people are saying, the people who are arguing for abortion are saying, either explicitly or very often implicitly, or in effect, are saying that no, we're not valuable in virtue of what we are. We're valuable only in virtue of certain accidental, that is, incidental, additional characteristics. Certain attributes that you have to acquire. And I think this is where the central, or one of the places where at least the central issue is. What makes human beings valuable? Are human beings valuable in virtue of the fundamental kind of being that they are? Are they valuable in virtue of their nature? Or do they have to have something in addition to their human nature? Some other additional attribute. Now, this is the central issue. The pro-abortion position really, most of the arguments are predicated on the view that, well, in order to be valuable as a subject of rights, you need to have something like self-consciousness or self-conscious desires. There's some plausibility to that. They're not going to come up with completely implausible arguments. I mean, we differ from other animals, dogs and cats. How? Well, we have reason, we have free choice, we have self-consciousness. Dogs and cats, it's okay, not that we should treat them cruelly, but it's okay to euthanize dogs and cats, I think. Sometimes sometimes we need to euthanize a little more than what we do, but I won't go into that. But in any case, dogs and cats, other animals, it's okay to kill them at certain times. Okay to kill them, maybe for, it's okay to kill trees. It's okay to kill grass. We have to mow the grass, pull up the weeds. These are living beings. The difference between us and other living beings, the difference between us and other animals also, is that we have reason, we have free choice. So we shape our own life. We have self-consciousness, and by our self-consciousness, we are shaping our own life. And so that's where we draw the line between persons. Persons are beings who have this capacity, or basic capacity, to reason and make free choices, versus other animals, such as dogs and cats, don't have those basic capacities, and so it's okay, when necessary, to kill them. It's okay to use them. It's okay to own them. But we don't own persons. Why? Because persons are rational beings, have free choice. So there's some plausibility to say, well, okay, in order to be a person, you have to have self-consciousness. Oh, but wait a minute now, embryos and fetuses don't have self-consciousness. And so they're not persons, therefore it's okay to kill them. That's probably something like that argument along those lines is maybe the most popular argument still. Well, the problem with that, and basically the argument is that in order to be a person, in order to be a subject of rights, you have to have a capacity for self-consciousness. That's their argument. And then they say, well, okay, the embryo or fetus does not have that capacity, therefore the embryo or fetus is not a person. The problem is that, it depends on what you mean by capacity. By capacity, look at a 6-week-old baby. That 6-week-old baby does not have a capacity that can be exercised, can be actualized, can be fulfilled for self-consciousness in the next few minutes. It's not yet self-conscious. A 6-week-old baby, a 6-week-old infant is not yet self-conscious. Right? It doesn't yet do anything that other animals don't do, except for maturing itself toward the stage where it will do all sorts of things that other animals can't do. But it has another kind. It doesn't have an immediately exercisable capacity. In other words, it doesn't have a capacity that can be exercised in the next few minutes or maybe even the next few months. But it does have a basic, we would say a basic sort of deep down or radical capacity. It has a human nature. It has a nature orienting it to the stage where where he or she will reason, make free choices, be self-conscious, shape his or her own life. So that human baby, that 6-week-old baby, can't right now reason and make free choices. Isn't yet right now self-conscious in the sense of having concepts of herself. But she is the same being who, if she's not killed, does not die by accident or disease, will actively develop herself and is actively developing herself to the stage where she will shape her own life by her self-conscious choices, reasoning, and so forth. So she has a rational nature, even though right now she's not reasoning. And that, of course, is looking to the fundamental kind of being she is, rather than an accidental attribute. Because she is a human being, she has all of the internal resources needed to actively develop herself to the stage where she will reason, make free choices, and do the kinds of things, the actions that show that she is different from other animals. But that's now looking at her nature. Okay? So the point is this, is their argument is to say, okay, in order to be a person, you need to have self-conscious, you have to have an immediately exercisable capacity for self-consciousness. And they have to add, or at least assume, that immediately exercisable part. Because if they don't, it's also true of every human fetus, every human embryo. It's true of each and every human being that he or she has a basic, natural capacity to reason, make free choices, be self-conscious, shape his or her own life. Each human being has a nature, has a constitution, orienting himself or herself to develop himself or herself to the stage where he or she will reason, make free choices, and so forth. So their position, the argument they're making here has a flaw. The flaw is that they've cherry-picked, as it were, the kind of capacity they want to zero in on. The question to ask them is, well, why do you pick immediately exercisable capacity rather than, say, a deep-down capacity that's part of a being's nature? And I don't think there's an answer for that, though. It's the nature of a being that determines whether you are depriving that being of something, some possible future. If I kill someone, I'm not depriving them of what they're actually doing right now. I'm not depriving them of their present. I'm depriving them of their future. If I catch them while they are unconscious, if I catch them, say, while they're in a coma, they don't have the immediately exercisable capacity for self-consciousness then, but if I killed them then, I'm still depriving them of a future. I'm still bringing it about. I'm still choosing to deprive them of a future like that you and I are enjoying right now. Harming someone is depriving them of a future they might have had. But the future something might have had isn't tied up with their immediately exercisable capacities. It's tied up with their basic nature. So, in other words, look, harming a being is depriving them of a future they might have had. But secondly, the future they might have had is linked to their basic nature, to the fundamental kind of being they are. It's not linked just to the immediately exercisable capacities that they have. Therefore, it's unreasonable, it's irrational to pick out immediately exercisable capacities. It's irrational to zero in on accidental attributes that are acquired sometime during the life cycle, rather than to focus on the fundamental kind of being that we are dealing with. So, if there's a living being in front of me, maybe this living being in front of me is in a deep sleep. It doesn't have an immediately exercisable capacity to do much of anything. Maybe this living being in front of me is in something like a coma. Doesn't have an immediately exercisable capacity for anything. But the question is, am I significantly harming this being? The question is going to be not what exercisable capacities this being has, but what fundamental kind of thing it is. Scott Klusendorf tells the story. He says that he's making the point that you have to ask what kind of being is being killed. He says, well, so imagine you have a mother who's washing dishes in the, I guess it's a sexist story, but anyway, it's Scott's story, so it's not my fault. But you have a mother washing dishes in the kitchen, and her little boy her little boy comes in and he says, "Mommy, can I kill it?" She has her back to the boy, and what does she ask? what is she going to say to this little kid? We don't know. She's got to turn around and say, well, what is it? Kill what? Well, we talk about a fly, we talk about a cricket, we talk about your little sister. Now, I want to change that story up a little bit. You say, okay, can I kill this? You turn around, well, you don't know exactly what it is. But she's not going to ask, well, what can it right now do? That doesn't make any sense. She doesn't ask, okay, what can it do within the next couple of months? No, she's going to ask what kind of being it is. Because what kind of being it is, that determines whether you are removing from it the capacity to the overall, the long-term capacity to develop his or her life by shaping his or her life. That's what makes us valuable as subjects of rights, is that we shape our own lives, or we have the capacity, the deep down, radical capacity to shape our own life. That's what makes us unique, irreplaceable. Someone asked me, I was down in Chile. It's always hard to pronounce that. I always want to say Chile, but that's not right. I was down in Chile in May, and a guy, they have dogs all over the place down there. I mean, it's just anyway. So the subject of dogs came up, and this professor had not the professor who brought me down, but the professor had an affection for his dog. I wanted to know, well, why is it that, doesn't this dog have rights like you and me? And I said, well, look, if you lose your dog, you can get another one. That wasn't quite, what he was expecting. It didn't settle the issue. And I said, look, if God, the conversation kept on, but the point about the dog doesn't shape his or her own life by free choice. I think the dog does not have free choice. What that dog does is determined by the forces, the extrinsic, by its internal nature and the extrinsic forces acting on it. Okay. So now, and I was serious about being replaceable, if you cloned that dog and had all of the extrinsic forces acting on the dog, it'd be just the same as if the original dog. Maybe this isn't the best example. I guess don't use dogs in your example. But here, my point is this: is that if an animal lacks free choice, okay, then they're in principle replaceable. Okay? If you lose your laptop, you don't care about getting that particular. If somebody gave you a laptop just like it, then you're fine with that, right? It can be replaced. Why? Because it doesn't really make any original contributions. Okay? It's determined to do what it does by its internal configuration plus the extrinsic forces working on it. And so it doesn't make any difference whether if you have two laptops exactly alike in their internal configurations, it doesn't make any difference in terms of whether you get laptop A or laptop B, laptop number 137 or laptop number 1137, right? And there's no difference in terms of use, and there's also no difference in terms, they don't make an original contribution. But now when there's a being that has free choice, even if God chose, God could, I think, it's not within his, not without his, create someone exactly like, probably wouldn't be that difficult for him, create someone exactly like me, and put him right next to me. And two human beings looking exactly alike, all the blemishes and so forth. And then now, the other one walked out this way and the other one walked out that way. After that, now you can't replace them. I mean, they're completely different. So what makes us valuable, what makes us irreplaceable, is that we are the kinds of beings who shape our own life. We're not just the results of the extrinsic forces working on us. Now, let's go back to this, a little bit of digression there on dogs and laptops. Let me go back to this. The point that I wanted to make is this, is that it's the fundamental kind of being that you are, and the fundamental kind of being that makes you and me valuable is that we are persons, we are rational beings. But that's true of each and every one of us. Every human being has that nature orienting him or her to reason and free choice. So when they say, okay, when they say in order to be valuable, you need to have an immediately exercisable capacity. You need to have some attribute. You need to have some incidental characteristic. We have to come back and say, no, I think human beings are valuable in virtue of what they are, in virtue of the fundamental kind of being that they are. They're not just valuable in virtue of certain attributes that they acquire at some point during their life. You could illustrate that by thinking of a person in a coma. If you go to the hospital and you hang around intensive care units, you'll see that some people are in comas for weeks. Now, when that human being is in a coma for weeks, during that time, when he's in a deep coma, he does not have the immediately exercisable capacity for self-consciousness. He cannot right now reason, make free choices, and so forth. But is it okay to kill him? Well, the answer is no. We still take care of him in an intensive care unit if necessary. Is that a pro-life song over there? I don't know what else. It's not a Nazi song, is it? I don't know. Oh, good. Okay. I'm okay with it. I just, as long as it wasn't, I can't hear the language even. It even sounds, German. Not that German is all Nazi, but I didn't. It has kind of a German tune to it, though. Like one of those old songs. Some of those old, old movies where you have this SS officer singing this thing. I'd be careful. They're going to hear me. But anyway. To try to abbreviate that point, that last, it's too late to make a long story short. But to review real quick, is that I think the point is that human beings are valuable in virtue of what they are, in fundamental kind of being that they are, not in virtue of certain attributes they have. Now, and I have an argument for that, and my argument was that, well, when you harm a being, you're depriving them of their long-term future, not just of what they can do in the immediate future. And so the relevant question is the fundamental kind of being they are, not the immediately exercisable capacities they have. Now, let me add one other point, and is that this is really part of our political tradition. This is part of our political tradition. It goes back to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, of course, is that we hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal. All human beings are created equal. And Abraham Lincoln asked in the Gettysburg Address said that we need to return to that. And Martin Luther King said that we need to return to that. It's not the color of the skin. It's not those accidental attributes. It's not those characteristics that make one valuable. It's the human nature that makes one valuable. That's really the basis of our political society, is that we have equal fundamental rights. We're not equal with respect to characteristics, those accidental attributes. We're not equal with respect to height, with respect to weight, with respect to intelligence, with respect to likability, with respect to degree of development. What makes something valuable is the fundamental kind of being it is, not its size, not its degree of development, not its intelligence, not what it looks like, not the color of its skin, not his or her sex, but the fundamental kind of being he or she is. So that's a central point. If you and I are valuable in virtue of what we are, then that means that we are valuable as subjects of rights from the moment we came to be. If what makes you valuable is the fundamental kind of being you are, then it doesn't make sense to say that you came to be at one point, but then you became valuable as a subject of rights at some later point. And also, of course, that's the same at the end of life. If what makes you valuable is the fundamental kind of being that you are, then it's not the case that, well, you still exist, but you have lost your value. We can't say, well, yes, that's grandfather, but grandfather is no longer a person. Or we can't say, yes, that's a human being, but that's no longer a subject of rights. If what makes a being valuable as a subject of rights is the kind of being he is, then from the moment that being comes to be, and to the moment that being ceases to be, he or she has basic fundamental rights. So then the question is, well, when does this human being come to be? In other words, if the human being is valuable as a subject of rights from the moment he or she comes to be, the next question is, well, when does the human being come to be? And then that's where Dr. Kunat indicated the evidence. I won't go into that in detail, but the basic points there, I think, are that when you ask, well, when does the human being come to be? Is a human embryo or is the human embryo, a human fetus, are these human beings? We've already indicated or given some arguments to show that if they are human beings, they are persons. Well, then when is it that they come to be? Well, here's where biology kicks in, or embryology, which is a specific part of biology. And the basic points there are that, as Dr. Kunat indicated, the way human beings come to be is from the contributions of the mother and the father. When the sperm unites with the ovum, the sperm and the ovum cease to be and generate a new thing that's not identical with the sperm or ovum. This new thing is called a zygote, and this zygote then grows by internal differentiated development, divides into 2 cells, then 4, then 8, 16, and so forth, although the divisions are sometimes asynchronous, so sometimes you get 9 and 13 and so forth. So, at fertilization, when the sperm joins with the ovum, the sperm and the ovum cease to be, you have a new thing, you have a distinct thing. So that's the first point. One is the embryo from the fertilization onward is distinct. It's not a part of the mother, not a part of the father. Secondly, it's obviously a human something. It's a product of humans. It has the genetic constitution characteristic of humans. And thirdly, this is an important point, and it's important to logically distinguish this, it's a whole human being, even though immature. It's not functionally part of a larger organism. This is important because there are things like human tissues, there are things like hearts that have been explanted that are human but not whole human organisms. What shows this is a whole human organism is that this being has within itself all of the internal resources needed to actively develop himself or herself to the stage where it will be he or she will be a mature human organism, which means it already is a human organism, internally actively developing herself. Human tissue does not do that. Explanted hearts do not do that. They don't have the internal resources to actively develop themselves to the mature stage of a human. So it's a human organism, it's a distinct human, whole, organism, a whole living distinct organism from fertilization onward. Okay? People who deny that are denying science. We're the ones that are supposed to be denying science, right? Because because of creationism and all that kind of stuff. Okay? But they're the ones who actually do deny science. Okay? Often, not always. So we put that together. The basic, I'm a philosopher. I'm not particularly well broadly read. I read in very narrow. But my sort of forte has not been wide-ranging literature and history and so forth. My forte is logic, and I've always tried to kind of get the logic of the thing down and to get it kind of simple. And so the simple thing is, one, we are valuable as subjects of rights in virtue of what we are. Second step, what we are is a human organism. Now, what we are is a human organism, because we're a human organism, because we're an organism, we come to be when this organism comes to be. Because a human organism is a rational being, that's why each and every human organism is a subject of rights. So a human, you could say, it's a rational organism, an organism with a nature orienting him or her to shape his or her life by choices. So in virtue of being an organism, we come to be in fertilization. In virtue of being a rational being, we are valuable as subjects of rights. So we're valuable in virtue of what we are. What we are is a human organism. Thirdly, the human organism comes to be in fertilization. The conclusion follows that, therefore, from the moment of fertilization, you have a subject of rights. That's the thing I think that has to be drilled home, that the logic of that, to move it away from just accidental characteristics of beings to the question of what fundamental kind of being is it. Now, I said, this is the second part, the very short part of this, is I said that our culture has moved in the last 7 or 8 years toward emphasizing the equal protection more so than just liberty. So the argument, I think, has changed a little bit. I think the legal issue is now shifting somewhat. Instead of focusing on a liberty question, it's focusing on equal rights, equal protection. We saw this, of course, in the last election, where we were accused of participating in a war on women. So the argument that's being emphasized very often today is that abortion is needed as a social good. Access to abortion is needed in order to level the playing field for men and women. If women do not have access to abortion, then they are being discriminated against. They are being held back from their autonomy, from their ability to participate fully in the workforce, in the political sphere, and so forth. President Obama spoke to the Planned Parenthood at a Planned Parenthood a couple of years ago at the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, celebrating Roe v. Wade. He said, quote, "We need to continue our efforts to ensure our daughters have the same rights, freedoms, and opportunities as our sons to fulfill their dreams." Wow. In other words, having access to abortion is necessary for our daughters to have the capacity to fulfill their dreams. Access to abortion, even difficulties that might be placed in the way of that access, are viewed as impeding women from quote, fulfilling their dreams. So I think this move, this shift, I'm not saying it's occurred just because of the president, but this shift, I mean, there's a lot of things that are occurring. I think the success of the same-sex marriage issue there is sort of taught the pro-abortion side how to go. We're going to go not with liberty, but we're going to go with asserting our rights, asserting our equal rights and removal of any impediments to that. I think that's a turning point. So we're with a new kind of argument. On this view, with this view, abortion now is seen not just as a bad thing that people have to be able to resort to because we have to give them that freedom. That's bad enough as a denial of the equal dignity of all human beings. But now it's viewed as a positive good, or at least very often by people making this argument, it's viewed as something, as a positive good, as something that contributes to the public good, as something that is needed, and that anyone who opposes is going to be viewed as hateful, as bigoted, as participating in the war on women. Now that means that the underlying premise of that argument is that in order for women to be equal to men, they must be unencumbered by unplanned pregnancies. Actually, any pregnancy would be an encumbrance on this view. And so abortion, as removing those unencumbered, those encumbrances, is seen now as something good and something now the country has to get behind and promote. So there's a drive not just to tolerate abortion, which is bad, but also to promote abortion, to fund it, to insist on it, to encourage it. It would also follow that teaching that abortion is wrong, or even thinking that abortion is wrong, is contrary to the public good. Is going against this, what they want, if abortion is needed to redress fundamental inequalities, if that were true, then those who speak out against abortion are really contributing to the inequalities. If abortion is needed to redress fundamental inequalities, then we need to shape a culture that promotes and celebrates abortion and subsidizes it, makes it easy, makes it accessible. Denise McCurra mentioned a while ago that I think in Ohio, you said about 20% of the abortions were chemical abortions. Chemical abortions are paid or will be paid for by Obamacare. There's going to be some fight about that, but it's not yet in the books that they're going to be surgical abortions. But chemical abortions are being paid for, will be paid for by Obamacare. Every insurance company will be forced to pay for chemical abortions. Whatever firm you work at, even if it's a firm fervently against abortion, even if it's a religious firm, if it's a church, then you will be exempt. But universities and hospitals are required now. Some of their grandfather clauses and so forth, some of their policies, but they are required as part of Obamacare to provide insurance that covers chemical abortion. Now, chemical abortions are paid for up to 20% of abortions. So how do we reply for this? Well, I think we have to go back to the fundamental. The basic argument is that it goes back to a fact of nature. It is a fact of nature. Men and women have sex, and when they have babies, when women become pregnant, it is easier for men to walk away from that responsibility than it is for women. So it is certainly true because of a fact, because women are the ones who carry the baby, who gestate the baby, who bond with the baby, It is certainly true that unplanned pregnancies impact women differently than they do men. Pregnancies in general impact women differently than men. Women are the ones who get, I mean, these are the facts of nature that still have not been removed, except there's sort of a drive to remove it by maybe, by not having women get pregnant, having them be able to evacuate to the womb. So that's, I mean, it is, so it is true that men are able to be irresponsible in that situation much more easily than women can, and very often, I think it's certainly true, has always been true, that men tend to be more irresponsible, or I should say, it's a larger number of men being irresponsible with respect to unplanned pregnancies. And I'm not calling all unplanned pregnancies bad, but saying that it's an occasion for men to be irresponsible, and men can be irresponsible more easily. They can walk away from that. And women can't walk away from the pregnancy unless they first have the baby or abort the baby. So that is a fact of nature. Now the question is what to do with that. I mean, and the fact that men oftentimes, not all men, but oftentimes men are irresponsible is unjust to women. But the question is how to address that situation. From the fact that a law, so let's go one step further. So a law against abortion will have a different kind of impact on women than it will have on men. That's, I think, certainly sociologically true. A law against abortion will impact women differently than it does men. But it does not follow as a legal or jurisprudential or moral matter that from the fact that a law differently impacts one group of people as opposed to another group of people, that therefore the law is unjust. Just because a law impacts different groups differently doesn't mean that the law is treating those groups differently. Right, this is the same kind of argument. Here, some of the arguments here were being made, similar types of arguments were being made about slavery in the 1860s. Okay, if we pass a law against slavery, this is really going to impact rich plantation owners much more greatly. It's going to be a hardship on them, and these other people are going to get off scot-free. From the fact that a law impacts some groups more than others, it does not follow that the law is unjust. It does not follow that the law is singling out those people. Now, men and women are both, the second part of the reply to this argument is that men and women are, in fact, in truth, men and women are both responsible to their children. Men have as much moral responsibility to the children they help to create as women do. That's the truth of the matter. It is also true that it is possible for men to evade their responsibility more easily than it is for women. But it's not a solution to that situation to encourage women to be just as irresponsible as some men are. Here we go back to, I think, this. We have to sort of keep it simple. Well, maybe it's too late for that. Okay, but keep it simple. Is that the end does not justify the means. Okay? And we might want to do certain things to try to help women who are impacted more severely by unplanned pregnancies than men are, or by by pregnancies out of wedlock. There are several things we need to do there, but encouraging them to kill their babies is not one of them. And the third point is that what's going on here, I think, is this is impacting our culture in a large way. It's treating. There's a fundamental assumption here is that in order for women to be equal to men, They have to be just like irresponsible men. Okay? You have to sort of neutralize their uterus in order to make them equal to men. That's not a compliment to women. That's not the defense of women. So, but again, so that's the third point, is that it's a drive, I think, part of a large drive, or I'm not sure which is the part, which is the whole, but part of our culture is to deny any significant differences between men and women, and then where there are significant differences, to try to suppress those by violence. Here, there's a fundamental difference between a man and a woman, is the woman is the one who carries the baby, gives birth to the baby. That's what makes a woman different from a man. That different, and then there are all sorts of other differences that kind of flow from that. But that fundamental difference is what's being denied. So part of what our culture is trying to do is in a way a war on nature, or a war on real differences out there, and try to obliterate all those differences in the name of autonomy, in the name of choice, in the name of what? In the name of prosperity and safety. So, the one thing is to go back to, I think, to the drive home the point. To drive home the point, their point is that we are valuable in virtue of what we are. We're valuable in virtue of the fundamental kind of being we are, not just in terms of accidental attributes. And to go back to the Declaration of Independence, which says that this is the fundamental truth of our nation that we're built on. It's not the color of our skin, it's not the age, it's not the degree of development, it's the fundamental kind of being that you are. All men are created equal. Not just born human beings, but unborn human beings as well. And yes, there are differences between men and women, and those differences between men and women sometimes are taken advantage of by irresponsible men. But it's no solution to those differences to encourage women to kill their babies or to have their babies killed. And the last point, just sort of in terms of comment on the culture here, is I agree with what Denise Mikura said about the importance of Roe v. Wade. I think that's very important. I also want to say, though, and I think, and Denise agrees with this, that we should not get caught up with scoring. Okay? We've been at this fight, well, some of you have not been at this fight that long. Well, actually, almost none of you, but yeah, I'm older now, the older side of the ledger. Okay? But in any case, some of us have been at this fight for over 40 years. And it's easy to get discouraged. Especially when we see other things in the culture. But I think we have to remember that this is not like a boxing match, it's not like a football game where you know what quarter you're in, or you know what round you're in, and there's going to be a clear decision. Like a boxing match, you have like 10 rounds or 15 rounds, and then there's a clear decision. Well, sometimes it could be a draw, but in any case, you know where you are, and there's going to be somebody's either going to win or lose or draw in the next 40 minutes. That's not the way this is. There's not going to be. This fight. I think this fight's just going to go on and on and on. If we overturn Roe v. Wade, we still have to shape and continue to try to shape this culture. There still will be sin, both original and personal sin, that tempts people not to respect each and every human being. And if another president gets in there and appoints more bad judges, and it's going to be another generation before we get to overturn Roe v. Wade, we're going to keep up the fight. We have been keeping up the fight for the last 40 years, and we have made headway. We had not overturned Roe v. Wade, but we've changed a lot of minds and changed a lot of hearts. And that's what we want to keep the strategy on the politics. Yes, that's part of it. And we want to also, what we're in this is to change hearts and minds to respect human life. We want to save babies, but we also want to save people who are tempted to kill babies. And we do have some success. We're not going to have measure. It's hard to measure what kind of success we have. So it's not like we can't keep. It's not like it's not like a boxing match where we can say, okay, well, there's going to be a clear knockout. No, if next election a president is another bad president is put in, who appoints bad Supreme Court judges. That's not going to be that's going to be bad, but it's not a knockout. The fight will continue. Father Richard Newhouse, who Denise also mentioned, always used to say, always encourage us, never weary, never rest. God calls us to stand up for His weak, for the most vulnerable, for the weak. He's going to ask us at the end of the world what we did for the most vulnerable human beings. He's going to still ask us that no matter what the score is. We're not going to be able to keep the score. So that's why I think we shouldn't be discouraged. We couldn't think, okay, well, we're losing or we're winning. We can't say, we don't know whether we're winning or we're losing. It's a much more complex reality. What we know is, I think, is that we are making a difference.